In a hidden royal chamber, with no press and no fanfare, King Charles III made a move no one expected. He knelt, not before a monarch, not before tradition, but before his daughter-in-law, Kate. A moment buried from the world, now leaked by a senior palace insider. Why did he do it? What happened to Camilla? And why did this act mark the beginning of the crown's most controversial pivot? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was a night shrouded in secrecy, the kind that only the ancient halls of the monarchy could protect. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the weight of protocol, King Charles called for a private audience with Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Few knew about it, only those closest to the king, and even they weren't sure what was about to unfold. The air was thick with something unspoken, something ancient, almost spiritual. In a dimly lit chamber said to have once housed Queen Victoria's private confidences, Charles stood across from Kate. The room was silent, the only sound being the ticking of a grandfather clock echoing through centuries of royal history. His hands trembled, not with age, but with purpose. Then, without a word, the monarch fell to one knee. Not in shame, not in weakness, but in solemn recognition. Charles looked up at Kate, eyes gleaming with something between remorse and resolve. "You are the future of this family," he whispered. That was all he said. But those 6 words broke every rule of tradition. Not since the days of monarchs blessing their heirs in hidden chambers had something so symbolic taken place in defiance of public expectation. This was not a moment planned for the history books. It was a transfer of emotional power, a silent coronation in the absence of a crown. Camilla was not present. She had not been told. According to one aide, she had asked to join but was told there was no need. Charles wanted privacy. The Queen Consort, sidelined in the very palace she had fought to stand tall in, and when the ceremony concluded, Charles left the room without another word. Kate remained frozen, stunned, her hands clasped at her waist, barely breathing. She hadn't expected this. No one had. But someone had watched from the shadows, an aide who had remained loyal to the crown, but even more loyal to truth. Days later, that same aide leaked the story to an insider, setting off a chain reaction that neither Charles nor Kate could control. The story broke in the early morning hours, picked up by a tabloid with a reputation for pushing boundaries. "Kneeling King private coronation for Kate?" the headline read. At first, the palace refused to comment, but silence, in the age of viral speculation, only fed the flames. Social media erupted, journalists circled, royal insiders began making quiet calls. And just like that, a single, hushed moment in a candle-lit room had become the epicenter of a royal reckoning. Because it wasn't just about a gesture, it was about succession, about symbolism, about rewriting what it means to be royal. And those closest to the crown knew. Once power shifts behind closed doors, it's only a matter of time before it spills into the light. But behind this solemn act was a storm brewing. Camilla's tears weren't just about betrayal, they were about power slipping through her fingers. She waited in her private quarters, unaware that history was being rewritten in a room she wasn't allowed to enter. When the truth emerged, Camilla wept not out of fragility, but devastation. This wasn't just about affection, it was about legacy, about power, about being eclipsed. For the Queen Consort, it was the moment she realized she'd lost more than just Charles's favor. The news did not arrive with ceremony. It came in a brief, stammering whisper from a shaken aide who had been summoned by Camilla to inquire about Charles's whereabouts. "He's with Catherine," they said. A moment of confusion gave way to something more unsettling. Camilla's instinct warned her this wasn't a routine meeting. Something had shifted. Moments later, another aide rushed in, pale-faced, holding a copy of a leaked draft headline scheduled for tabloid release, "Kneeling King in private pledge to Kate." The Queen Consort's face froze, her fingers clenched. Then, silence. A deep, chilling silence that felt like the breath before a storm. And then, an eruption. She screamed, eyes wild, voice trembling. "It was supposed to be me." Her cries echoed through the chamber. According to an eyewitness, it wasn't the scream of a woman betrayed in love, it was the agony of a crown slipping from her grip. When Charles returned that evening, the halls were darker, colder, not by candlelight, but by the mood hanging over the air. Camilla was waiting, regal as ever, but every inch of her composure was held together by thread. She didn't shout, she didn't ask questions, she simply looked at him. The silence between them was suffocating. And then, he spoke barely above a whisper. It had to be done. That was all he gave her. No explanation, no apology. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the decision had been made and it was irreversible. Camilla turned away. The conversation, if it could be called that, was over before it began. That night, she did not sleep. Her staff said the lights in her suite stayed on until morning, and her desk was covered in correspondence letters she wrote but never sent. Those who have known Camilla throughout the years understand the weight she carried to stand where she stands. She fought tooth and nail to be seen not just as Charles's love, but as a legitimate figure in the royal family. The road to becoming queen consort had been paved with scandal, shame, and silence. She had endured public hatred, endured the ghost of Diana looming in every headline, and rebuilt her image one official engagement at a time. To be passed over now, not in title, but in spirit, was the deepest cut, especially when the woman being elevated was one Camilla had long seen as her silent rival. Letters from years past, now circulating in whispers, revealed Camilla's unease over Kate's growing influence. In one, addressed to a confidant, she wrote, "The people adore her. I fear Charles does too in a way I can't compete with. She doesn't remind him of mistakes. She makes him believe in the future." Within the palace, the ripple effects of the kneeling were immediate. Staff, who had once answered to Camilla, began shifting their tone around Kate. Security details reassigned. Invitations to events subtly redirected. Aides, who had championed Camilla, found themselves reassigned or cut off from high-level briefings. Her influence, which had once seemed permanent, began dissolving like ink in water. The palace was reorganizing itself, and it no longer revolved around the queen consort. But if Camilla was blindsided, she wasn't the only one, because even William hadn't anticipated the scale of what his father had set in motion. He walked into the room moments after the act. Kate's eyes were red. Charles's head still bowed. And William, caught between past and future, stood frozen. As the next king, he was supposed to lead. But what happens when his father bypasses him to elevate his wife? The moment hit William like a cold wind, silent, sharp, and impossible to ignore. He had been briefed that Charles would speak privately with Kate, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of his father on bended knee, the symbolic weight of it ringing louder than any formal announcement. For a few suspended seconds, he couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was a scene meant for a son inheriting the crown, not for a husband witnessing a shift in destiny that didn't include him. In that instant, the line between sovereign and successor blurred, and William was forced to ask himself whether he'd just been sidelined or silently handed a partner who now stood beside him in name, but above him in legacy. His instinct was to contain the moment, bury it before it became something irreversible. But even as Charles rose and left the chamber without a word, William felt the tremor beneath the surface. In Kate's eyes was a silent storm, part disbelief, part burden, but also something steadier, something like purpose. When they were alone, he asked her one question. What did he say? She hesitated, then repeated the words Charles had whispered. "You are the future of this family." That sentence lingered between them, heavier than any crown. William's voice was quiet when he replied, "This changes everything." He wasn't angry, not yet. But something inside him cracked not love, but control. He thought back to those arguments with Charles, the ones the public never saw. Heated debates behind closed doors about the modernization of the monarchy, about when and how William would begin to take on real power. Charles, always elusive, always cautious. William, growing more frustrated by the year. But never, in any of those exchanges, Had Charles hinted that he would leap over his own son to anoint someone else, especially not like this? And now, the one person William trusted more than anyone had just become the central figure in a royal realignment he hadn't signed off on. Behind palace doors, the whispers began almost instantly. Aides divided. Some urged William to speak out, to assert his rightful authority, and call for clarification on succession structure. Others warned him to stay silent for the sake of optics, unity, survival. The pressure was immense. Every corridor he walked through now seemed colder. Every glance from staff came laced with expectation or doubt. Yet William did what few expected. He said nothing. Not to the press. Not to the Privy Council. Not even to his closest allies. But behind his silence, something was stirring. He began to assemble his own version of a council quietly, carefully, not with titles or declarations, but through careful alignments. He started taking more frequent private meetings with Princess Anne, began reshaping the narrative through subtle shifts in engagement strategy. He made note of which advisors had changed their tone toward Kate, and which still reported exclusively to him. While the world focused on the kneeling, William was building something else, an invisible force, a fallback plan, a way to ensure that no matter how far Kate rose, he wouldn't be left in the shadows of his own kingdom. Yet the one person who didn't hesitate, who didn't doubt, was Kate herself, because the woman Charles crowned in private was already preparing for what came next. She entered the royal world with grace. But now, she was stepping into history. No longer just the Duchess adored by the public, Kate Middleton had become the unspoken heir to the moral throne. Charles's kneel was not just a gesture, it was permission to rise. In the hours after the ceremony, when the whispers had barely begun and the palace halls still echoed with disbelief, Catherine remained astonishingly composed, not out of coldness, but clarity. There were no tears, no declarations, no immediate reaction that could be picked apart or politicized. Those who saw her in the aftermath described a quiet strength in her eyes, as if the magnitude of the moment had already settled into her bones. Later that night, she wrote in her private diary, one she has kept hidden since her early days at the palace. The line that struck hardest: "It felt like the crown touched my shoulders." That single sentence revealed everything. This was not just a moment of recognition. It was a rebirth. She had entered the royal stage years ago as a commoner, married into legacy, and endured years of scrutiny. But now, for the first time, the institution itself had knelt to her. Within the ancient symbolism of monarchy, Charles's gesture was far more than sentimental. The act echoed a knighthood, a ceremonial submission of power to a higher cause. In medieval terms, it was a symbolic coronation without the crown. It said, without words, that Catherine wasn't just the wife of a future king, she was the stabilizing force the monarchy needed to survive. And people noticed. The reaction from palace staff was immediate and subtle. Small changes in protocol, different tones in greetings, a shift in body language during briefings. Several insiders even claimed certain senior aides began referring to her not as "Ma'am," but as "Your Grace." Not out of formality, but reverence. And Catherine noticed too. But instead of recoiling from it, she embraced the responsibility, not with pride, but with purpose. Those close to her said her entire demeanor changed in the days following the kneeling. She became more deliberate, more commanding, yet somehow more serene. Meetings that once centered around charity updates and ceremonial appearances now included deeper strategic discussions. She asked harder questions, demanded tighter operations. There were murmurs that she was already drafting plans to restructure her personal team, quietly moving long-time aides out and bringing in advisors with backgrounds in diplomacy, statecraft, and media warfare. It wasn't ambition for the sake of status, it was preparation. Catherine wasn't reaching for a throne, she was being shaped by the weight of it. Her inner circle, once modest and press-shy, began to shift. Invitations that were once filtered through layers of royal bureaucracy now came directly from her office. Foreign diplomats who used to sideline her as ceremonial now sought private meetings. Leaked memos revealed that several embassies had begun listing her name alongside William's in future protocol rankings. The palace didn't deny it. And perhaps most telling, neither did Charles. Still, behind all the quiet dignity and precise adjustments, there was one unavoidable truth. Her rise had triggered a political avalanche, because every ascension in the royal family comes at a cost. And while Catherine was walking calmly toward destiny, someone else, someone long determined to keep her own place in the spotlight, was preparing for war. But with every rise comes retaliation, and Camilla wasn't going to disappear quietly. In the shadows, she began crafting a plan to reclaim what was slipping from her grasp. A wounded lioness is the most dangerous. Camilla may have been caught off guard, but she was far from defeated. Late-night calls, secret meetings, and sudden changes to royal schedules revealed a silent war in motion. The Queen Consort was plotting her return, and it wouldn't be pretty. In the days following Charles's kneeling, while the world speculated and Kate rose in quiet grace, Camilla retreated into strategy. No longer was she the overlooked consort, stunned by betrayal. She was calculating, deliberate, and ready to strike where it hurt most. Her first moves were subtle. Closed-door meetings with advisors loyal to her since the early days. Friends in high places, aristocrats, media tycoons, and old-world allies were summoned. Private calls to select foreign dignitaries were made under the guise of routine diplomacy, but each interaction was designed to ask one silent question. How far are you willing to go to protect the Queen Consort's crown? Soon, patterns began to emerge. Invitations that had been tentatively extended to Catherine for overseas engagements were quietly rescinded. Charities previously associated with Camilla were restructured, with Catherine's name now appearing as honorary patron in early internal drafts. Camilla noticed and acted. A leaked email from her former press advisor revealed a campaign titled "Stability over Stardom," aimed at framing Kate as unprepared for the heavy mantle of national leadership. It was subtle sabotage, hidden beneath concern, disguised as caution. At exclusive dinners and royal banquets, whispers grew. Doubts about Kate's strength, questions about her readiness. The kind of invisible poison that doesn't kill but weakens. Behind the palace gates, tension grew thick. Camilla, once a unifier in Charles's eyes, became a disruptor. There were reports of scheduling conflicts, double-booked rooms, even deliberate delays on royal transportation to undermine Kate's appearances. But it was a whisper campaign within elite circles that drew the most concerned claims that Kate's inner circle was fractured, that she was too emotionally attached to the public image, too dependent on public approval to make hard decisions when the time came. The press picked up the trail, planting seeds of doubt in headlines disguised as praise. Camilla had turned perception into a battlefield, and she was winning small victories. Yet, Charles had begun to see through the maneuvering. His decision to kneel had already drawn a wedge between him and Camilla, but her reaction was now turning that wedge into a wall. When reports reached his desk of charities feeling pressured to choose between his wife and his daughter-in-law, Charles made a quiet but firm move, beginning to revoke Camilla's oversight of several key foundations, placing them under direct management of the crown. No statement, no confrontation, just quiet removal. It was an unmistakable signal, one that Camilla did not take lightly. The breaking point came not with Charles, but with Anne. In a meeting meant to be routine, tensions exploded. The Princess Royal, long known for her bluntness, reportedly confronted Camilla face to face. "You're tearing this family apart," Anne snapped. Camilla, uncharacteristically shaken, replied through gritted teeth, "She was never meant to reign." The room fell into silence. That line echoed far beyond its walls, reaching ears who had long doubted Camilla's place and now feared what she might do to keep it. But while Camilla waged a war of politics, Charles faced his own reckoning because not everyone in the palace believed the kneeling was his idea. Behind the throne, there's always someone pulling strings. Whispers have long swirled about Princess Anne's private counsel to the king, but sources now reveal it was Anne who convinced Charles to kneel. Her reasons? Cold, strategic, and brilliant, Days before the private ceremony, while the palace still appeared calm on the surface, a far more consequential meeting was already unfolding in silence. According to multiple insiders, Charles had summoned Anne late one evening, not as a sister, but as a strategist. Anne arrived without ceremony, without entourage, and without pleasantries. The conversation, those close to it say, was not emotional, it was surgical. Charles spoke of fractures, of Camilla's growing resistance, of public uncertainty, of a monarchy that felt increasingly fragile. Anne listened. Then she spoke a single, cutting truth. The institution no longer needed to defend itself. It needed to be reimagined. And in her eyes, there was only one figure capable of embodying that rebirth. Anne's reasoning was not rooted in affection, it was rooted in survival. She reportedly laid out a vision in stark terms. Catherine was trusted. Catherine was adored. Catherine represented continuity without scandal. The people already see her as the future, Anne is said to have told him. You either honor that, or you fight it. What she proposed was not a transfer of titles, but a seismic shift in symbolism. A gesture so powerful, it would reorder loyalties without a single decree. And then she said the word Charles hadn't dared to voice, kneel. Not to elevate Catherine above him in law, but to elevate her above doubt. To make it unmistakably clear where the moral gravity of the monarchy now rested. Within 48 hours of that meeting, a document circulated quietly among select palace offices. It never reached the press, but a fragment of it did. A leaked memo from Anne's office carried a bold heading, The Catherine Continuity Plan. It outlined a multi-phase repositioning of Catherine within royal operations, expanded influence over charitable networks, increased diplomatic exposure, and a long-term narrative shift framing her not merely as consort, but as cornerstone. Even more striking was a directive instructing palace historians to begin preparing materials that highlighted Catherine's role in the modern royal arc, integrating her story into legacy briefings traditionally reserved only for reigning or future monarchs. Anne's involvement also reopened old wounds. Her relationship with Camilla had never been warm, but in recent years it had cooled into something closer to rivalry. To Anne, Camilla represented a chapter the monarchy had survived, but not one it should be anchored to. When Camilla began maneuvering against Catherine, Anne saw confirmation of what she had long feared, that the internal battles were no longer private, and that leadership through sentiment had failed. In Anne's mind, Catherine was not merely preferable, she was necessary. And Catherine, for her part, was not a passive recipient of this design. Anne had been mentoring her quietly for years, guiding her through the unspoken architecture of royal power, the difference between appearance and authority, between position and influence. Insiders speak of a moment shortly after the kneeling, where Anne met privately with Catherine and placed her hand over Kate's, saying only, "Strength isn't given, it's worn." Some described it as the symbolic passing of the iron glove, a silent initiation into the world where crowns are built before they are worn. But as the monarchy realigned from within, the world outside began to notice, and the media storm was just the beginning of a public awakening. It was never meant to be seen, but one shaky camera, one anonymous upload, and the private ceremony exploded onto the global stage. As the footage went viral, royal protocol crumbled, and with it, the illusion of unity within the House of Windsor. The first appearance of the video didn't come from any newsroom. It surfaced in a dark, invitation-only forum known for leaking political scandals and suppressed recordings. A short clip, blurred edges, muted sound, but unmistakable. A figure unmistakably resembling King Charles, lowering himself before another slender, still, unmistakably Catherine. Within minutes, the clip was mirrored, then copied, then ripped from its original context and flung across social platforms like a spark in dry grass. By the time major outlets caught on, the world was already watching. Shock turned to obsession. The public didn't debate whether it was real. They debated what it meant. And in that debate, something extraordinary happened. Support did not fracture. It surged toward Kate. Comment sections filled with declarations that she embodied everything the monarchy should be. Headlines shifted from curiosity to coronation language. The queen we chose, the crown's new heart. It wasn't just approval, it was emotional alignment. Inside the palace, panic spread. Camilla's press office moved first, releasing a vague statement calling the footage misleading and deeply contextual. Within hours, another briefing contradicted it, calling the clip a private family moment misinterpreted by malicious actors. A third narrative emerged before nightfall, suggesting the video was staged, ceremonial, symbolic, anything but what it appeared to be. The inconsistency only fueled suspicion. Every conflicting word made the kneeling feel more deliberate, more real. International media didn't hold back. European networks framed it as a bloodless coup within the crown. American anchors spoke openly about a symbolic dethroning. Commentators dissected Charles's body language, Kate's stillness, the historical implications of a monarch kneeling to anyone at all. Every frame was analysed, every shadow turned into theory. And through it all, Buckingham Palace said nothing. No denial, no clarification, no outrage, just silence. That silence was deafening. To the public, it felt like confirmation. To insiders, it felt like surrender. Behind palace walls, the reaction was far less controlled. Emergency meetings ran into the early hours. Security units traced the leak across servers and shell accounts, discovering the upload had been routed through diplomatic networks, encrypted channels, and offshore proxies. Whoever released it hadn't just breached protocol. They had declared war. Discussions quickly turned from containment to punishment. There were threats, quiet, furious threats to strip titles, revoke protections, dismantle entire households if the source could be found. The leaker had not only exposed a moment, they had shattered the monarchy's final illusion, that what happened in private stayed in power's control. And still, Charles did not speak. He withdrew from scheduled engagements, cancelled appearances, postponed audiences. His silence became a presence of its own, hovering over every headline, every whispered meeting, every frantic call between courtiers. For the first time since ascending the throne, Charles appeared not as king but as a man cornered by a gesture he could no longer contain. But the question no one dared ask publicly was the one haunting the royal halls. Had Charles just made a promise he couldn't undo? Charles may have knelt, but now he must live with the weight of that gesture. Inside the palace, corridors echo with a single question. Was it a symbolic tribute or an unspoken abdication? Because once the crown tilts, it rarely sits the same again. In the aftermath of the leaked footage, the king vanished from sight. Public engagements were quietly cancelled, appearances postponed indefinitely, and those closest to him were told he needed time for reflection. But reflection was a soft word for what insiders described as turmoil. Behind the palace's locked doors, Charles was said to be both haunted and resolute. He had done what he believed the crown needed, but the consequence had come faster and louder than anyone could have predicted. He hadn't anticipated that a gesture meant to stabilize would destabilize everything. In his private correspondences, now circulating among a very small and trusted circle, one line stood out like a royal confession. "I've passed the torch, even if I still wear the robe." It was not just poetic, it was damning. A king uncertain of his throne is not a king for long. At the highest levels of the Privy Council, quiet discussions began, not about a formal abdication, but about interpretation. What did the kneeling mean in constitutional terms? Could it be framed as a blessing without implication? Or had the monarch, in one symbolic act, transferred the spirit of rule to someone unelected, unofficial, and yet now undeniably central? Lawyers debated clauses, historians scoured precedent. But no matter how they dissected the action, they could not undo the reaction. The world had already decided that Charles had anointed his successor not in bloodline, but in belief. And still, William said nothing. His silence was louder than his father's absence. To some, It appeared like unity. To others, it reeked of strategy. Those closest to him said he was playing the long game, letting the institution recalibrate around Catherine while quietly retaining his grip on the future. But the deeper fear among royal loyalists was that William was no longer in control of the narrative. That the kneeling had shifted not just public perception, but internal power, and William, by saying nothing, was letting it solidify. Meanwhile, Camilla found herself increasingly cut out. Royal charities that once ran through her office were now reporting directly to Crown overseers. Invitations once automatically extended her name were now reviewed before confirmation. Her appearances were scaled back. Her advisors began to jump ship. The Queen Consort, once central to Charles's reign, had become peripheral, watching as an unspoken coronation unfolded in slow, elegant strokes around her. And then there was Kate. She made no announcements, no declarations. She simply acted, stepped in, filled gaps, took briefings, met diplomats, and with every small move, something monumental shifted. Palace staff, unprompted, began calling her Your Grace. It wasn't official. It wasn't ordered. But it was telling. The kind of change that doesn't need to be legislated because it's already lived. But it was a final, chilling whisper from Charles to Kate that may have revealed the ultimate truth about what comes next. In the echo of footsteps and fading candlelight, King Charles leaned toward Kate, voice trembling with age and conviction. "Protect them when I no longer can." Those 7 words weren't just paternal, they were prophetic. And with them, the monarchy entered a new, irreversible era. The words were not rehearsed. They weren't meant for ceremony or memory. They were raw, born from a place far deeper than protocol could reach. He didn't look her in the eye when he said it, he looked past her, as if seeing a world he might no longer be part of. Kate stood still, the weight of his whisper settling on her like invisible armor. She didn't respond right away, but when she did, it was not in words. It was in the quiet clasp of Charles's hand, and the solemn nod that only William witnessed from the shadowed corner. In that moment, no titles were needed. A legacy had been entrusted, a reign had been foreseen, and a vow, though unspoken, had been made. Within days, those closest to the king began noticing a change, not in duty but in distance. Charles started delegating more than expected, asking fewer questions, appearing more as a figurehead than a force. Whispers leaked into the press, cryptic at first rumors of early succession planning, of transitional restructuring. One tabloid ran a front-page headline that read, "Regency Rising," and while the palace offered its usual deflections, the silence from within felt louder than any denial. The corridors of power weren't echoing with orders anymore, they were filled with anticipation. Behind the scenes, the monarchy began shifting psychologically. Not officially, not by law, but by feeling. A quiet regency had begun. Not declared, but lived. Meetings, once led by Charles, were now chaired by William and Kate. Briefings, once routed through Clarence House, now passed through Kensington. The transition wasn't sharp, it was glacial. And yet, somehow, it felt inevitable. The institution was preparing itself, not for a replacement, but for a rebirth. Media speculation erupted. Theories, polls, debates. Had Charles abdicated in spirit, if not in fact? Was this a strategy to safeguard the crown's future, or a subtle surrender? But amid the noise, one image remained seared into the minds of those closest to the family. Camilla, standing alone at a palace window, watching. Tears once again glistening in her eyes, but not from rage this time. From resignation. Because in that final act, she saw the truth. The battle was over. The crown may still rest on Charles's head, but the heart of the monarchy now beat within someone else. The crown has not changed heads, but the heart of the monarchy has already moved on. And as history watches, all eyes are on the woman who now holds the future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.